subscribers to davidicke.com. Well, I've been warning for years and years and years about the fact that there was a plan to destroy free speech and the free flow of information. When I say years, I mean back into the early 1990s. And something else I've been pointing out in relation to the few controlling the many is the essential use of divide and rule to divide and rule the many. And we've had a week in which so many examples of this have come together. First of all, the horrors in Barcelona, which will take more time than we've had to see what actually happened and why. But it's dividing and ruling people, and it's creating that other essential element of control, which is fear. But I want to concentrate this week on the aftermath of events in Charlottesville in the United States. And also, and it's all related, on the open now decision by Google-owned YouTube, to censor what they call conspiracy theories and use the word or the term hate speech to widen and widen its interpretation to encompass more and more information and opinion. That is not hate speech. And like I say, all these things come together. All the way through the American election campaign, I was pointing out that the real scandal was not whether you voted for Trump or Clinton, but the fact that a country of 324 million people was being given a choice between Clinton and Trump. That's the scandal. And it should send alarm bells ringing in terms of perceptions of democracy and the voice of the people, that such a choice was offered. And it was, in my opinion, more and more the campaign went on, and certainly when he won, that Donald Trump was specifically put in there by the hidden hand to create chaos and, crucially, to create division. Now, we can see that that is precisely what has happened. But having said that, I'm going to stand up for Trump. It's rare, but I am, because he has been abused from almost all sides for saying that the tragedy and the conflict in Charlottesville over the removal of a statue involved violence and unpleasant people on both sides. Now, we live in a post-fact world. There's no need for facts anymore. I mean, you can fire Tomahawk missiles on Syria without any facts to back it up. You can accuse Assad of using chemical weapons on his own people without any evidence to back it up, because we're in a post-fact world. It's not about facts anymore. It's about emotion, and it's about prejudice. And so the fact is that there was violence on both sides in Charlottesville. There was violence from the so-called white supremacists and neo-Nazis, And there was violence from this Antifa group of the so-called far left, which actually openly justifies violence on the grounds that the fascists are violent, so we have to be violent. And what does that create? Twice the violence. Oh, right. We've moved on then. But when Trump states the obvious, all hell breaks loose. And he's supporting white supremacists, and when he's just stating a fact. And we've had this this word fascism thrown around like confetti. And it's worth remembering what fascism is. This is the dictionary definition: a political philosophy, movement or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual, and that stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. And another definition is a tendency toward or actual exercise of strong autocratic or dictatorial control. So let's just take two parts of that definition of fascism. One, forcible suppression of opposition, and a strong autocratic or dictatorial control. So we can surely, using this definition, describe what Google, YouTube, Facebook, etc. are doing in systematically suppressing information and opinion that challenges the status quo, that challenges the establishment. We can describe that surely as fascism. Oh, they'll call themselves progressive because that's what fascists hide behind these days. You know, if you want to introduce a tyranny and don't let anyone notice, don't do it through some bloke with a tiny moustache goose-stepping down the street. Someone might notice. You do it through people that claim to be the opposite, that claim to be anti-fascist. That's how you do it. And so, forcible suppression of opposition. Well, that's what the suppression of information challenging the establishment is doing. It's suppressing it, suppressing opposition to the establishment. Thus, it's a form of fascism. What about political correctness? Political correctness, which is, of course, the religion of so-called progressives. What does that do? It suppresses opposition by suppressing what people can and cannot say. What did the Nazis do in Germany to anyone who was challenging them? They shut down their events and meetings so they couldn't speak and expose what the Nazis were doing. They burned their books. What is what Google and YouTube and Facebook are doing other than electronic book burning? Precisely the same. But, ooh, no, we're progressive. We are against hate speech. Yes, on your definition of what that is. And so we come to the political reaction to Trump saying there was violence on both sides. We've got Theresa May here, the British Prime Minister, speaking, ironically, really, at a ceremony to mark the arrival of a big, vast new British aircraft carrier. And May said of Trump's words, I see no equivalence between those who profound or propound fascist views and those who oppose them. I think it is important for all those positions of responsibility to condemn far-right views wherever we hear them. Let's go through that again. I see no equivalence between those who propound fascist views and those who oppose them. So if you are violent in your promotion of far-right views, then that's bad. If you are equally violent, sometimes more, in opposing far-right views, that's okay. There's no equivalence between the two, when frankly and profoundly and obviously there is. Antifa and this black bloc technique that they use now at the recent summit in Hamburg were responsible for considerable violence and smashing up businesses that had nothing to do with the summit. If someone called far right did that, or someone as did called far left did that, there is no equivalence. The far right smashing up the businesses and causing violence is always worse than the opposition. And in fact, they're not opposition because they're mirrors of each other. If you go far enough to the right and far enough to the left, you find the ground where both of them are standing on. These labels are just there to give the illusion that they're different. Now, far-right fascist views, says Theresa May. She was, like I say, appropriately, saying this while marking the arrival of a big new aircraft carrier. This is the Theresa May that heads a British government, like her predecessors, that has been responsible for fascism by any definition you can imagine of fascism, year after year after year in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria. Labour government, Conservative government, on and on it went. The same stream of violence, the same stream of mayhem, death, destruction. And that is not fascism. You see, this is what's happening. You're getting extremism of that unspeakable kind that takes itself and promotes itself as the middle ground, as being centrist. So then it condemns what it calls extremism of the far right. I think extremism of the far right is a bloody nonsense. I think extremism of the far left is a bloody nonsense because they're both the same. But for those that are responsible for the death and destruction of millions of people and millions of lives, to start pontificating about the condemnation of violence and fascist views, this is the same Prime Minister, Theresa May, who continues to supply state-of-the-art weapons to Saudi Arabia to suppress its own people, including beheading, and to bomb the innocent in Yemen. Oh no, we're moderates. Not from where I'm bloody sitting. The hypocrisy of it's unbelievable. But then we come to the progressive and stunningly vacuous Vince Cable, leader of the post-democratic Liberal Democrat Party. It's hard to say that, but I force myself. Who is saying that Donald Trump has shown he is unable to detach himself from the extreme right and racial supremacists. The fact that he remains highly dependent on White House advisors from the extreme right shows he is firmly anchored in the detestable worldview, and it would be completely wrong to have this man visit the United Kingdom. He wants the visit cancelled. Where was Cable when the progressive Barack Obama was bombing the innocent day after day after day with drone strikes and others? Silent. So if you bomb the innocent in the Middle East and you are Donald Trump, that's terrible. But if you're Barack Obama, who's a progressive, well, that's less terrible. I'm not sure the people on the other end would buy that. And the far right, as it's perceived, was in the background controlling Obama, who for 8 years of his presidency, there was never one day when America wasn't at war with someone. The same network of what is called far right was behind George Bush, was behind Barack Obama, and is behind Donald Trump. They're all the bloody same. But if we realize they're all the same, we might say, hold on a minute, they're all the same. Where's the choice? So we're told to believe in labels, to give the illusion of differences, when in all fundamentals there are no differences. Which brings me to Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the opposition Labour Party in Britain, who has also said it is completely wrong to have this man come on a state visit to the United Kingdom. See, good virtue signalling. That's the key, virtue signalling. See, I'm against what you're against. Instead of saying, well, I'm actually going to look at the facts and I'm going to respond to the facts. Not tell you what you want to hear, but tell you what is. That's what statespeople do. It's what politicians don't. The Labour leader accused Mr. Trump of refusing categorically to denounce white supremacists and neo-Nazi violence, and called on Mrs. May to condemn his response to the clashes. There are still some people, in fact more than a few, that believe that Jeremy Corbyn is different. No, he's not. He's just another fraud from the political class that produces all the other frauds. And when it comes down to it, he's just as gutless and system serving as anyone else. Which is, but he tells you what you want to hear very well if you're of his persuasion. So he becomes a hero. For what he does? No. For what he says. Outcomes change the world, not words or rhetoric or promises. Which brings me to this. Hounded out for speaking up on child sex gangs. The Equalities Watchdog criticised Labour, Jeremy Corbyn's Labour, yesterday for forcing an MP to quit after she spoke out over Pakistani men and grooming gangs. Jeremy Corbyn told Sarah Champion to resign from the shadow cabinet or be sacked 5 days after she wrote that Britain had a problem with Pakistani men targeting vulnerable white girls. We are back to the post-fact society. We are seeing court case following court case exposing Asian gangs of men horrifically treating almost entirely white girls and white women. But because of the political correctness of the anti-fascists, so much of this stuff took years and years and years to come out because people were frightened of in authorities, and not least Labour Party councils, for dealing with what the police knew about because of fear of causing racial tension. Instead of, see, this is the point. We hear the progressives, we want diversity. All right, so why are you destroying it with political correctness? But that's another thing. But they say they want equality, but it don't. What equality does, and what equality says, true equality, which I'm all for, vehemently for, it says this: we are going to judge what people are by what they do and what they say. So the colour of their skin is irrelevant, which it is and it should be. Their religion is irrelevant. Their political persuasion is irrelevant. Their income bracket is irrelevant. All these fault lines of divide and rule are irrelevant, because what we're going to do is judge people by their behaviour, by what they do and what they say. That's the absolute bottom line, non-racial way of interaction. But progressives don't want that. What progressives say is if you highlight Asian men running gangs and saying there's a problem by the horrific way they treat white women and girls, then that's racist. So I'll give you another definition of fascism. When facts become racist, which is where we are. Now, this lady, Sarah Champion, has campaigned for years about child grooming and child abuse by these gangs in her constituency in Rotherham, where one of these gangs was big time exposed, eventually, with no help from the Labour bloody council, who were looking at the ballot box rather than what was being done to people that should be in their care, young girls. But last night, the Equality and Human Rights Commission Chief Executive, Rebecca Hilsenrath, said it was wrong that a respected MP who had been hounded out by a Twitter storm and all these far-right left-wingers around Corbyn for candidly speaking about child sexual exploitation. In a strongly worded intervention, she said that oversensitivity about language, tell me about it, had resulted in a climate which had led to the neglect for so long of the victims of these terrible crimes. The self-obsessed, extremist progressives should find themselves a bloody mirror and ask it some questions about the way its self-indulgence, its self-obsession, its me, its virtue signalling created situations, and they're still happening in other places, have no doubt about that, created a situation in which these young girls were so viciously treated. year after year. The former head of the Racial Equality Commission, Trevor Phillips, said he was gobsmacked and dispirited by the news that Miss Champion had been forced out. It feels to me like the Stalinists, brackets C, Nazis, because communism and fascism are just different names for the same centralized tyranny. Like the Stalinists have decided to remind everyone that they are in charge. And we are now in a situation where we are being offered two extremes. One extreme is being promoted as progressive, and the other one as far-right Nazis. I say they stand on the same ground. And all those in the middle, all those truly liberal people of what people call the left, and those of what people call the right, that are not neo-Nazis, are not white supremacists. And I'm talking there in those two groups, the vast, vast, overwhelming majority. They're caught in the middle of these two violent, fascist extremes. And their voice is not heard, because all you hear is the voice of the media talking about the far right and neo-Nazis, and then condemning someone for saying, actually, there's violence on both sides, which is about the most obvious thing you could possibly say in the circumstances and given the facts. And those in the middle need to start speaking out and not being manipulated, and their world controlled by these two states of extreme. And if you want a world where the few control the many, essential to that is dividing and ruling the many. And so what we have is the same hidden hand working through the Antifa, so-called anti-fascist group of the so-called far left, and through groups of the far right, or quote white supremacists. And they're being played off against each other, same hands holding both strings, to create the division and the chaos and the upheaval and the polarity, well, alleged polarity, that we've seen this week. And they'll keep doing it, and they'll keep doing it because they want a civil war in America, and they want the same to happen around the world by playing off different groups against others. And the vast majority in those groups who don't want a civil war, who don't want race wars, they better start speaking up fast and calling out their extremists, because if they don't, civil war and race war is what we'll have. Antifa, and the far right, same thing. They're being played like a violin. And how many agents provocateurs from the establishment are in both groups, urging them on? Grow up, ladies and gentlemen of the communal extreme. Grow up. We need maturity to sort this out, and you ain't showing any. In fact, they're now playing your music.